The dust had barely settled from the wagon wheels when Jane Thompson realized she was utterly alone in a canyon that looked nothing like the grassland where camp had been just hours before. She stood there, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum, watching the emptiness where 20 wagons and 40 souls had been. The cooking fire she had carefully banked that morning was cold ash now. The bedrolls were gone. The livestock, the children's laughter, the constant creaking of wood and leather, all of it vanished as if swallowed by the New Mexico desert itself. Jane pressed her palms against her dusty skirt, trying to steady herself. It was October 1878, and she had been with this cattle drive for 3 weeks, traveling from Texas toward Fort Sumner, where her brother supposedly waited. She had been gathering wild sage near the rocks when the camp pulled out. How had nobody noticed? Her canteen was half full. She had a small knife in her pocket, the one she used for cutting thread. No horse, no rifle, no food except the biscuit she had wrapped in cloth that morning, now crumbling in her apron pocket. The sun was climbing higher, turning the air thick and hot. Jane was 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Dallas who had never spent a night alone under the stars. Her hands trembled as she looked around, trying to determine which direction the wagons had gone. The ground was hard-packed and rocky, offering few clues. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. "They will notice. Someone will notice." But even as she said it, doubt crept in like a snake through tall grass. She was the quiet one, the woman who kept to herself, helped with cooking, but never complained, never drew attention. Her parents were dead. Her brother was her only living relative, and he had gone ahead months earlier. Nobody on this cattle drive really knew her. She was just a passenger who paid her fare and tried not to be a burden. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Jane found a patch of shade beneath an overhanging rock and rationed her water, taking small sips that did little to ease the dryness in her throat. She tried to remember everything she had ever read about survival, but her books had been about mathematics and literature, not wilderness endurance. The sun moved across the sky with terrible slowness. She thought about walking, trying to follow the trail, but which way? The landscape looked the same in every direction: scrub brush, red rocks, endless sky. By afternoon, Jane had convinced herself that she would die here. Her body would be found weeks from now, dried out like the sage around her, and her brother would never know what happened. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Water was too precious to waste on crying. That was when she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats. Jane scrambled to her feet, her legs stiff from sitting. Her heart leaped with hope, then plummeted with fear. This could be rescue or danger. Bandits roamed these territories, outlaws, men who would see a woman alone as opportunity rather than someone in need. She picked up a rock, gripping it in her fist, knowing it was a pathless defense but needing to hold something. The rider came around the outcropping, and Jane's breath caught. He sat tall in the saddle, a cowboy in his mid-20s with dark hair beneath a worn hat, his face shadowed by the brim. His horse was a sturdy sorrel, and a rifle rested in the scabbard at his side. He pulled up short when he saw her, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle, before he seemed to register that she was alone and unarmed. "Miss Thompson?" His voice carried across the space between them, rough from the trail, but holding genuine surprise. "Yes." Her own voice came out hoarse. "Yes, that's me." He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. As he walked closer, Jane could see his face more clearly. He had strong features, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of creek water after rain. She recognized him now from the cattle drive. He was one of the ranch hands, someone she had seen at the edges of camp but never spoken to. "I'm Dalton Kincaid," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "What happened? How did you get left behind?" The concern in his voice, the fact that he had asked what happened rather than blaming her, made Jane's composure crack. "I was gathering sage. I walked over the ridge, and when I came back, everyone was gone. I don't understand how they could have packed up so fast, how nobody noticed." Dalton's jaw tightened. She watched emotions flicker across his face, anger and disbelief among them. "They noticed?" "What?" "I noticed. When we stopped for midday rest, I looked around and you were not there. I told Mr. Harrison, the trail boss. He said we could not spare the time to go back, that we needed to make Fort Sumner before the weather turned." Dalton's hands clenched at his sides. I argued with him. Several of us did. He said you probably wandered off on purpose, that women who traveled alone usually had their reasons for disappearing. Jane felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. I paid my passage. I have been nothing but reliable. I know. Dalton met her eyes directly. That's why I quit. You what? I quit the drive, gave up 3 months' wages that were owed, told Harrison he could find himself another hand because I was not about to leave a woman stranded in the desert. He gestured to his horse. Took me a while to backtrack, figure out where we had camped last night. I was worried I would not find you. Jane stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. This man, this stranger, had given up his job and his wages to come back for her? Why would you do that? Dalton looked almost surprised by the question. Because it was the right thing to do. Because you matter. He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. Now, we need to get moving. Sun will be setting in a few hours, and we have got ground to cover. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Jane was acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth of him at her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. She had never been this close to a man who was not family. Proper Dallas society would have been scandalized. But here in the wilderness, propriety seemed like a distant concept. Where are we going? She asked as they started moving. Fort Sumner is about 2 days' ride northeast. We will need to find water and make camp tonight. His voice near her ear sent an unexpected shiver through her. I have supplies. We will be all right. As they rode, Dalton told her about himself. He was 26, from a small ranch in West Texas. His father had died when he was 16, leaving him to care for his mother and 2 younger sisters. He had worked cattle drives to earn money, sending most of it home. His sisters were married now, his mother living with the younger one, so Dalton had been free to take work further from home. What about you? He asked. Why Fort Sumner? Jane told him about her brother, Michael, who had gone west to work as a clerk in the general store, about how their parents died of fever last spring, leaving her alone in a boarding house with dwindling savings. Michael had written, saying she could come west, that he would help her find work, maybe teaching if they could get a school established. You are a teacher? Dalton asked. I was. I taught reading and arithmetic to children in Dallas. I loved it. She heard the wistfulness in her own voice. But the school closed when funding ran out. Everything seemed to close last year. The country is still recovering from the panic. I know it, Dalton said quietly. Lots of folks struggling. That is part of why I do not understand Harrison's choice. We are supposed to help each other out here. That is how we survive. They rode until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple that Jane had never seen in the city. Dalton found a sheltered spot near a dry wash where twisted cottonwoods provided some cover. He helped her down from the horse, and Jane's legs nearly buckled. She had been tensed in the saddle for hours. Easy, Dalton said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. Take a minute. He set about making camp with efficient, practiced movements. He unsaddled the horse, rubbed the animal down, let it drink from the canteen before hobbling it near some sparse grass. He gathered brush and made a small fire, explaining that they could not risk a large one that might draw unwanted attention. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee. Not much of a dinner, he apologized, handing her some. It is a feast, Jane said honestly. She had not eaten since that crumbling biscuit. The jerky was tough and salty. The hardtack nearly broke her teeth, but she had never tasted anything better. They sat on opposite sides of the fire as darkness settled around them. The desert came alive with sounds Jane did not recognize. The yip of coyotes in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the sigh of wind through the rocks. Are you frightened? Dalton asked. Jane considered the question honestly. I should be. I was terrified earlier, when I thought I would die out here alone. But right now, with you here, I feel safer than I did on the whole cattle drive surrounded by 40 people. Why is that? Because you came back. She looked at him across the flames. You sacrificed your wages and your position to make sure I was all right. That tells me more about your character than anything else could. Dalton was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that you measure a man by what he does when nobody is watching. Well, God was watching today, and I could not leave you behind. It would have eaten at me the rest of my life. Still, Jane said softly, thank you. I do not think I have properly thanked you. You saved my life. We are not out of the woods yet, or, I guess, out of the desert." He smiled slightly and Jane found herself smiling back. They talked late into the night, speaking in hushed voices that seemed appropriate for the vast darkness around them. Dalton told her about growing up on a ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, the freedom and the hardship of that life. Jane told him about teaching, the joy of seeing a child's face light up when letters suddenly became words. Words became stories. Stories became windows to other worlds. "I never learned much reading," Dalton admitted. "Just enough to get by. My mother taught me letters, but I was always needed for work." "It is never too late to learn," Jane said. "If you wanted, I could teach you. I mean, we have 2 days of riding ahead. I could at least help you improve." "I would like that," Dalton said, and the warmth in his voice made Jane's heart skip unexpectedly. When it was time to sleep, Dalton laid out his bedroll for her and took only his saddle blanket for himself. Jane protested, but he was firm. "You are my responsibility now," he said. "I am going to make sure you are comfortable and safe." Jane lay beneath the stars, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of leather and sage and something distinctly masculine. She could hear Dalton's breathing on the other side of the fire, steady and reassuring. Despite everything, despite being stranded in the wilderness, she felt a strange sense of peace and something else, something she was almost afraid to name, a flutter of attraction, a growing admiration for this man who had risked everything for her. The next morning, they woke to a brilliant sunrise. Dalton made more coffee, and they shared the last of the jerky. As he saddled the horse, Jane watched the way he moved, the confidence and grace of someone completely at home in this environment. He caught her looking and smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she confirmed. They rode north and east, following landmarks that Dalton seemed to read like a book. He pointed out things as they went, the type of cactus that stored water, the tracks of animals in the sand, the shape of clouds that might mean rain. Jane listened, fascinated, realizing how much knowledge it took to survive out here. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse in the shade of a rocky outcrop. Jane took the opportunity to make good on her promise. She found a flat stone and used a smaller rock to scratch letters into the dust. "Come here," she said to Dalton. "Your first lesson?" He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Jane felt hyper-aware of his presence, but she focused on the letters. She wrote out the alphabet, saying each letter, then writing simple words. Dalton watched intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Now you try," she said, handing him the rock. His first attempts were shaky, the letters uneven, but he had a good memory, and he worked at it with the same determination she imagined he brought to everything. After an hour, he could write his own name and hers. "Look at that," he said with obvious pride. Dalton Kincaid and Jane Thompson. The way he said their names together, the way he had written them side by side in the dust, made Jane's cheeks warm. She looked away, flustered by her own reaction. They continued riding, and as the afternoon wore on, Dalton began to relax. He told her stories from the trail, funny incidents with stubborn cattle and green cowboys. Jane found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. Grief had weighed on her since her parents died, and the uncertainty of her future had been a constant anxiety. But here, in the middle of nowhere, with this unexpected man, she felt lighter. "Can I ask you something?" Dalton said as the sun began its descent. "Of course." "Why were not you married? A woman like you, educated, pretty. I would have thought you would have had plenty of suitors back in Dallas." Jane was grateful he could not see her face clearly from his position behind her. "There was someone once, a lawyer's son. We had an understanding, or so I thought. But when my parents died and I had no more money for a dowry, he suddenly remembered he had always intended to marry the banker's daughter." "He was a fool," Dalton said firmly. "Maybe, but he was also practical. Marriage is a business arrangement for most people. It does not have to be." Dalton's voice was quiet but intense. "My parents married for love. They had nothing, built everything from scratch together. I always told myself I would do the same. I would rather be alone than settle for less than what they had." Jane's heart was beating too fast. She could not remember ever having such an honest, intimate conversation with a man. "That is admirable, but also risky. What if you never find it? Then I guess I will be alone. but at least I will not spend my life wondering what if. He paused. What about you? What do you want? I want to matter to someone, Jane said, surprising herself with the honesty. I want to be seen, really seen, not just as a convenience or a burden or an obligation. I want to be someone's choice, their first thought in the morning and last thought at night. I want to build something meaningful with someone. That is not too much to ask, Dalton said softly. That is everything worth having. They made camp that evening near a small spring that Dalton had known about from previous drives. The water was clear and cold, a miracle in the desert. Jane washed her face and hands, feeling almost human again, despite her dusty, travel-worn clothes. Dalton caught 2 rabbits and snares he set up, and they had fresh meat roasted over the fire. This is the best meal I have had in weeks, Jane said, licking grease from her fingers. Wait until you taste my beef stew, Dalton said. My mother's recipe. I will make it for you sometime. I would like that, Jane said, then realized what he was implying. Sometime. A future beyond Fort Sumner, beyond delivering her safely to her brother. After dinner, they sat closer together than they had the previous night. Dalton had his rifle across his lap, staying alert even as they talked. Jane found herself studying his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. What are you thinking? He asked, catching her looking. I am thinking that I should have been terrified these past 2 days. I should have been anxious and worried and desperate to reach civilization. But instead, I have been happier than I have been in a long time. She took a breath, feeling brave. Because of you. Dalton turned to look at her fully. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Jane, I need to tell you something. I need to be honest. All right. I noticed you the first day you joined the drive. You were standing by the lead wagon, looking nervous and excited at the same time. You had this little smile, like you were starting an adventure. I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. He spoke quickly, as if afraid he would lose his courage. Every day after that, I found excuses to be near your part of the camp, to catch glimpses of you, hear your voice. I learned you liked to walk in the early morning, so I started taking that watch. I am not some kind of stalker, he added hastily. I just wanted to be near you, to make sure you were safe. Jane's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Why did you not talk to me? Because you are a lady, educated, refined. I am just a cowboy with dirt under his fingernails and no prospects beyond the next drive. What would I have to offer you? He looked down at his hands. But when Harrison said we were leaving you behind, I could not do it. I could not leave you. Not just because it was wrong, though it was, but because the thought of never seeing you again, never hearing your voice, never knowing if you were all right, it was unbearable, so I came back. You said I mattered most, Jane whispered, remembering his words from yesterday. You do. Dalton met her eyes again. I know it is crazy. I know we barely know each other, but Jane, you matter most to me, more than the job, more than the wages, more than anything else I can think of. Jane reached out and took his hand. His palm was calloused and rough, his fingers strong. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. I am glad you came back, not just because you saved me, but because these 2 days with you have shown me what I was looking for. You see me, Dalton, really see me, and I see you too. What do you see? His voice was rough. I see a good man, an honest man, someone brave enough to do the right thing when it costs him everything, someone who is gentle with horses and patient with amateur students. She smiled. I see someone I could very easily fall in love with, someone I think I'm already falling for. Dalton lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. I have already fallen, he admitted. Probably started falling the first day I saw you. Hit the ground hard yesterday when I found you safe. There is no going back for me now. Then do not go back, Jane said. Go forward, with me. He kissed her then, a soft press of lips that spoke of promise and possibility. Jane had been kissed before, quick stolen moments with the lawyer's son that had felt obligatory and awkward. This was nothing like that. This was warmth spreading through her whole body, a sense of rightness settling into her bones. When they pulled apart, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. We should get to Fort Sumner, get you settled with your brother, he said. But after that, if you are willing, I would like to court you properly. Do this right. I am willing, Jane said, smiling. More than willing. They stayed up late again, talking and planning and stealing kisses like teenagers. Dalton told her about his dreams of having his own small ranch someday, nothing fancy, just enough land for some cattle and horses. Jane told him about wanting to start a school again, how she missed teaching. They talked about how those dreams might fit together, two puzzle pieces finding their match. When they finally slept, Dalton's bedroll was closer to hers. Not improper, but near enough that Jane could hear him breathing, could reach out and touch his shoulder if she wanted. She fell asleep feeling safer and happier than she had in years. The next day dawned clear and hot. They were up early, eager to cover ground. Dalton estimated they would reach Fort Sumner by evening if they made good time. Jane found herself both excited and reluctant. Excited to see her brother, to have shelter and safety again. Reluctant because she knew that reaching Fort Sumner meant the end of this strange, wonderful bubble where it was just her and Dalton against the world. Mid-morning, they ran into trouble. 3 riders appeared on the trail ahead, rough-looking men on equally rough horses. Dalton tensed immediately, his hand moving to his rifle. "Stay calm," he murmured to Jane. "Let me do the talking." The men blocked the trail. The one in the center, a heavy-set man with a graying beard, looked them over with obvious calculation. "Well, what do we have here? A cowboy and his lady friend." "Just passing through," Dalton said evenly. "We do not want any trouble." "Trouble?" The man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Who said anything about trouble? We are just curious. That is a nice horse you got there, and that is a very pretty woman." Jane felt Dalton's entire body coil with tension. "We are riding to Fort Sumner. We have nothing worth taking." "I would say you have plenty worth taking," one of the other men said, leering at Jane. What happened next was too fast for Jane to fully process. The bearded man reached for his gun. Dalton was faster. His rifle came up in one smooth motion, and the crack of the shot echoed off the rocks. The bearded man howled, clutching his arm as his gun fell to the dust. "The next one goes through somebody's heart," Dalton said, his voice cold and hard. "Your choice whose?" The other 2 men looked at their leader, then at Dalton's steady rifle, then at each other. The wounded man was cursing, blood seeping between his fingers. "You shot me. I did, could have killed you, might still, if you do not ride away right now." Dalton's finger was on the trigger, his aim unwavering. The men retreated, the wounded one needing help to mount his horse. They rode off south, casting angry looks back, but clearly deciding that whatever they might have gained was not worth the risk of Dalton's rifle. When they were out of sight, Dalton lowered the gun. His hands were shaking slightly. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." Jane was shaking too. "That was terrifying, but you were incredible." "I have never shot a man before," Dalton admitted. "I have fired warning shots, scared off predators, but I aimed to hit him, aimed to hurt him, to protect you." I did not hesitate. "You did what you had to do. They were going to hurt us, rob us, or worse." Jane touched his arm. "Thank you for keeping us safe." "Always," Dalton said. "I will always keep you safe, Jane, as long as I draw breath." They rode hard after that, both eager to put distance between themselves and any potential pursuit. Jane held on tight, feeling the power of the horse beneath them, the strength of Dalton's arms around her. The fear from the encounter gradually faded, replaced by a deeper trust. She had seen him tested, seen him rise to the challenge without hesitation. Fort Sumner appeared on the horizon as the sun began to set. It was not much to look at, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures clustered around the old fort. But to Jane, it looked like paradise, civilization, safety, a place to rest. Dalton rode straight to the general store, the largest building on the main street. He helped Jane down, and her legs wobbled after so many hours in the saddle. He kept a steadying hand on her elbow as they walked to the door. Inside, a thin man with spectacles was counting inventory. He looked up at the sound of the door, and his eyes went wide. "Jane? Jane, is that you?" "Michael!" Jane rushed forward, and her brother caught her in a tight hug. "I made it. I finally made it. What happened to you? Harrison came through 2 days ago. He said you had been on the drive, but that you left in Texas, changed your mind." Michael pulled back, looking her over. "You look like you have been through hell." "Because your Mr. Harrison is a liar," Dalton said sharply from the doorway. He left your sister stranded in the desert because he could not be bothered to wait while someone went back for her. Michael's face darkened with anger as Jane told the story. His hands clenched into fists and he looked ready to hunt Harrison down himself. That sorry excuse for a man. If I ever see him again, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person he is. How could he do that? You paid your passage. It does not matter now, Jane said. Dalton came back for me. He saved my life, Michael. He gave up his wages and his job to make sure I was safe. Michael turned to look at Dalton properly, really seeing him for the first time. Jane watched her brother take in Dalton's trail-worn appearance, the serious expression, the protective way he stood near the door. Michael was no fool. She saw understanding dawn in his eyes. I owe you a debt I can never repay, Michael said, extending his hand. Thank you for bringing my sister home safely. I am Michael Thompson. Dalton Kincaid. They shook hands. I did what anyone decent would have done? Sadly, we both know that is not true. Most men would not have sacrificed what you did. Michael glanced between them, noting Jane's hand still on Dalton's arm, the way they stood close together. Please, you both must be exhausted and starving. I have rooms above the store. Come up. Let me get you cleaned up and fed properly. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Michael's wife, Sarah, was a bustling woman with kind eyes and efficient hands. She drew a bath for Jane in their small washroom, providing clean clothes and soap that smelled like lavender. Jane sank into the warm water with a groan of pure pleasure, scrubbing away days of dust and grime. When she emerged, feeling more human than she had since leaving the cattle drive, she found Dalton downstairs in the store. He had also cleaned up, his dark hair wet and slicked back, wearing a borrowed clean shirt. He looked up when she came down the stairs, and the expression on his face made her blush. You are beautiful, he said simply. Sarah had prepared a feast. Roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden. They ate around the small table in the apartment, and Jane thought she had never tasted anything so delicious. Michael and Sarah wanted to hear the whole story, so Jane and Dalton took turns telling it, filling in details for each other, their narrative weaving together naturally. So, what happens now? Michael asked when the story was done. He was looking at Dalton. What are your plans? Dalton set down his fork carefully. Well, sir, I was hoping to find work around Fort Sumner. I am good with horses and cattle, can do general labor, whatever is needed. I want to stay close by, if Jane is willing to court her properly. Court her? Michael's eyebrows rose. You just met. Michael, Jane said sharply, I am 22 years old. I do not need your permission, though I would prefer your blessing. Yes, Dalton is going to court me. And yes, I hope it leads where I think it is leading. Where you think it is leading, Sarah interjected with a knowing smile. Jane, you are practically glowing. I have not seen a woman so in love since I looked at my own mirror on my wedding day. Jane met Dalton's eyes across the table. I am in love, she confirmed. It happened fast, but that does not make it less real. I am in love too, Dalton said, with your sister, Michael. I know I'm not much, no money, no property, just a cowboy with a horse and a rifle. But I love her, and I will spend every day proving I am worthy of her. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Jane held her breath, surprised by how much she wanted her brother's approval. Finally, Michael smiled. You risked everything for her, when you had no reason to, except your own conscience. You kept her safe, treated her with respect, brought her home. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. You have my blessing, Dalton, and I might know about a job. Really? Dalton leaned forward. There is a rancher about 5 miles from here, Tom Crawford. He is getting older, looking for a reliable foreman to help run the place. His last man quit to go prospect for silver. It is steady work, decent pay, and there is a small house on the property. I can introduce you tomorrow if you are interested. I am very interested, Dalton said. Thank you, sir. Call me Michael. We're going to be family, I suspect. That night, Jane lay in a real bed in the small spare room, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. She could not sleep, her mind too full of everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she had thought she was going to die alone in the desert. Now she was safe, reunited with her brother, and in love with a man who was everything she had not known she was looking for. There was a soft knock at her door. Jane, are you awake? Dalton's voice. She got up and opened the door. Dalton stood in the hallway, still dressed, looking uncertain. I am sorry. I know I should not be here, but I could not sleep without saying goodnight properly." Jane smiled and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind her for propriety's sake. "I could not sleep either. I keep thinking this is a dream, that I am going to wake up still on the trail, and none of this will have happened." Dalton took her hands in his. "I know we need to take things slow, do this properly, but Jane, I need you to know that I am serious about this, about you, about us. I know you are. I am serious too." She squeezed his hands. "We will do this right. We will court, let everyone see that we are a good match. And then, when the time is right, we will build the life we talked about under the stars." Dalton kissed her forehead, a chaste but tender gesture. "Good night, Jane. Sweet dreams." "Good night, Dalton." She went back to bed with a smile on her face and finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The next weeks established a pattern. Dalton took the job with Tom Crawford, and the old rancher took an immediate liking to him. The work was hard but satisfying, and Dalton proved himself quickly. The small foreman's house needed work, so Dalton spent his evenings fixing it up, preparing it with obvious intention. He came into town 3 times a week to see Jane. Sometimes they walked together through the small town, and Jane introduced him to the other residents. Sometimes they sat in the store with Michael and Sarah, playing cards or just talking. Sometimes they rode out into the countryside, Dalton teaching Jane how to handle a horse properly, Jane continuing his reading lessons. Fort Sumner was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business. Jane was aware of the gossip, the speculation about the cowboy and the schoolteacher, but the gossip was mostly positive. The story of how Dalton had saved her had spread, growing more dramatic with each retelling. People admired him for it, and they saw how he treated her, with respect and obvious affection. The older women approved, the men respected him. Jane found work helping Sarah in the store, and giving informal reading lessons to some of the local children, whose parents wanted them educated, but could not afford a formal school. It was not the same as having her own schoolhouse, but it was satisfying work, and it kept her busy. 2 months after arriving in Fort Sumner, on a cold December evening, Dalton invited Jane to see the house. Michael and Sarah came along as chaperones, Sarah bringing a basket of food for supper. The little house was transformed. Dalton had repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, built new furniture. It was small but cozy, with 2 rooms and a fireplace that he had carefully restored. He showed them around with obvious pride, pointing out details, the sturdy table he had built, the rocking chair he had traded for, the kitchen area with shelves for dishes. "It is perfect," Jane said honestly. "Dalton, you have done so much work. I wanted it to be ready," he said. Then he took her hand and led her to the front room, Sarah and Michael following with knowing smiles. "Jane, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Every day I wake up knowing I am going to see you is a good day. Every night I go to sleep thinking about you. You make everything better, brighter, more meaningful." He got down on one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Jane's hands flew to her mouth, tears already springing to her eyes. "I do not have much to offer you," Dalton continued. "Just this little house, my wages, and a future that will take a lot of hard work to build. But I can promise you that I will love you every single day for the rest of my life. I will be faithful, honest, and true. I will be your partner in everything, your friend and your love. Jane Thompson, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. It was not fancy, but it was beautiful. "Yes," Jane said through her tears. "Yes, Dalton, I will marry you. I love you so much." He stood and kissed her, and Sarah let out a happy cry while Michael clapped. When they pulled apart, Dalton slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I was not sure of your size," he admitted, "but the jeweler said we could adjust it if needed." "It is perfect," Jane said. "Everything is perfect." They were married in January 1879, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Sumner. Jane wore a dress that Sarah helped her make, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar. Dalton wore his best clothes, a dark suit he borrowed from Tom Crawford. Michael walked Jane down the aisle, and Sarah stood as her witness. Tom and his wife came, along with half the town it seemed. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Dalton kissed her in front of everyone, Jane felt a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. This was everything she had wanted, not wealth or status or security in the traditional sense, but this. A man who loved her completely, who had chosen her above everything else, who saw her as the most important thing in his world. The townspeople threw them a celebration at the town hall. There was food and music, dancing and laughter. Dalton danced with Jane, holding her close, whispering in her ear how beautiful she was, how lucky he felt. "I am the lucky one," Jane whispered back. "You gave up everything for me. You came back when you could have kept writing. You chose me." "I will always choose you," Dalton said. "Every day for the rest of my life, I will choose you." They left the celebration early, riding out to their little house under a sky full of stars. Dalton carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing. The house was warm from the fire he had built earlier, and everything was ready. Jane had moved her few belongings in that morning with Sarah's help. Their wedding night was tender and a little awkward, but filled with love and laughter. They learned each other slowly, with patience and care. Jane had been nervous, but Dalton was gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed Dalton had built, talking quietly in the darkness. "Are you happy?" Dalton asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy," Jane said honestly. "Sometimes I think about that day in the desert, how frightened I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you came riding back, and everything changed." "You changed my life too," Dalton said. "I was just drifting before, moving from job to job, no real purpose. Now I have you, and I have a reason for everything I do. I want to build something with you, Jane. A real life, a future. We will," Jane promised. Together. The months that followed were some of the hardest and happiest of Jane's life. She had never done the kind of physical work that ranch life required, but she learned. She learned to cook over the fireplace, to tend a garden, to help with the horses. Her hands, once soft from a life of books and teaching, became calloused and strong, but she did not mind. Every night Dalton came home to her, and that made everything worthwhile. She continued her informal teaching, and by spring there was enough interest that the town decided to establish a proper school. They offered Jane the position, and she accepted eagerly. The school was just one room in a building near the church, but it was hers. She had 15 students ranging from age 6 to 14. She taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography. It was exhausting and wonderful. Dalton was proud of her. He came to see her classroom, looking at the slates and books, the letters she had chalked on the board. "My wife, the teacher," he said with obvious admiration. "The smartest person in Fort Sumner." "I am not that smart," Jane protested. "I just like learning. You are that smart, and you are changing lives here, giving these kids opportunities they would not have otherwise. That matters, Jane." In the evenings, Jane continued to teach Dalton. His reading had improved dramatically, and he was starting to work on writing longer passages. He kept a journal now, recording his thoughts and the day's events. Sometimes he read entries to her, and Jane was always touched by his insights and the way he saw the world. They talked about the future often, about eventually buying their own small ranch, maybe with help from Tom, who had no children and had grown fond of Dalton, about the children they hoped to have someday, about growing old together in this place they were making home. Summer came, hot and bright. Jane discovered she was pregnant in July. She told Dalton one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. They had talked about children, but she was not sure if he was ready yet. His face lit up like she had given him the greatest gift in the world. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Jane said, laughing at his expression. "In late winter, I think, February or March." Dalton picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully. "I am sorry. Should I not have done that? I do not want to hurt you or the baby." "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Jane said, but she was touched by his concern. "We have months before the baby comes. I am fine." He insisted she stop doing heavy work, which frustrated Jane, but also made her feel cherished. He fussed over her, making sure she rested and ate well. Michael and Sarah were thrilled at the news, already planning to be the best aunt and uncle possible. The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Jane dealt with morning sickness for the first few months. Teaching became more challenging as she got bigger, but her students were sweet, offering her the comfortable chair and volunteering to do anything that required bending or reaching. In February 1880, on a cold night with snow falling outside, Jane went into labor. Sarah came to help, along with Mrs. Crawford, who had experience with birthing babies. Dalton paced outside like a caged animal, refused entry to the birthing room, but unable to leave. It was a long labor, 12 hours of pain and struggle. But finally, as dawn broke, Jane heard the cry of her baby. A boy. She held him, exhausted but elated, counting his tiny fingers and toes. When they brought Dalton in, he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Jane and the baby with an expression of such wonder it made her cry all over again. He approached slowly, carefully, as if afraid he might break them. "A son," Jane said, her voice hoarse. "We have a son, Dalton." He sat on the edge of the bed, touching the baby's hand with one finger. The infant grasped it reflexively, and Dalton made a sound like a sob. "He is perfect, Jane, he is perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this." They named him Matthew after Dalton's father, Matthew Kincaid, with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. He was healthy and strong, with good lungs that he used enthusiastically. Parenthood was harder than Jane had imagined. Matthew demanded constant attention, and she was exhausted from sleepless nights and the physical demands of nursing. But Dalton was a devoted father. He took over every chore he could, held Matthew whenever Jane needed rest, walked the floor with the baby in the middle of the night. "Go to sleep," he would whisper when Jane tried to get up. "I have got him. Rest, Jane." She would watch them sometimes, Dalton walking with their son, talking to him in a low voice about the horses or the ranch or how much he loved the baby's mother. Jane's heart felt so full it was almost painful. Matthew grew quickly, becoming a chubby, happy baby who laughed easily. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything. Jane had to close the school for the fall term after he was born, but she returned in the spring, bringing Matthew with her. The older girls helped watch him, and he became the unofficial mascot of the school. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dalton continued to work for Tom Crawford, saving money steadily. Jane taught school and raised Matthew. They were not wealthy, but they were happy. They had each other, their son, their little house, and a community that had embraced them. In the winter of 1881, Tom Crawford fell ill. It was sudden and severe, a lung sickness that the doctor could not cure. Dalton spent long hours at the Crawford house, helping Mrs. Crawford and making sure the ranch continued to run smoothly. Tom called Dalton to his bedside one day in late January. Jane went with him, bringing soup that Mrs. Crawford had requested. She waited in the front room while Dalton went back to see Tom. He was gone for over an hour. When he emerged, he looked stunned. "What is it?" Jane asked, worried. "Is he worse?" "He changed his will," Dalton said, his voice strange. "He is leaving us the ranch, the house, the land, the cattle, all of it. He said he and his wife never had children, and we are the closest thing they have to family. He wants us to have it, to build our future here." Jane sat down abruptly. "The ranch? The whole ranch?" "Yes. He said I earned it, that he has never had a foreman work harder or care more. And he likes you, likes how you teach the children and take care of everyone." Dalton sat beside her, taking her hands. "Jane, this changes everything. We would have our own place, more land than I ever dreamed of owning. We could build the life we have been planning." "What did you tell him?" "I thanked him. I told him we would honor his legacy, care for the land and the animals the way he has. I told him we were grateful beyond words." Dalton's eyes were wet. "He has been so good to us. Jane, this is more than I could have ever hoped for." Tom Crawford died 2 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep with his wife beside him. The funeral was well attended, and Dalton gave a eulogy that had half the attendees in tears. He spoke about Tom's fairness, his kindness, his dedication to the land and the animals. He promised to care for the ranch as Tom had, to make it thrive. Mrs. Crawford moved to town to live with her sister, and Dalton and Jane took over the main house. It was much larger than their little foreman's cottage, with multiple bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a big front porch. Jane set about making it a home, balancing her teaching work with the demands of the ranch. It was a lot of work. Dalton hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle and daily operations. Jane hired a local girl, Maria, to help with the house, and watch Matthew when Jane was teaching. They were busy every moment, but they were building something real. In the spring of 1882, Jane discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news felt different, more settled and confident. They knew what to expect now, and they had the space and resources to handle another child. Their daughter was born in November, an easier birth than Matthew's had been. She had blonde hair like Jane's mother and Dalton's eyes. They named her Elizabeth Rose, and she was a calm, contented baby who rarely cried. Matthew, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to help with everything, bringing her blankets and singing the songs Jane had taught him. Dalton watched his children with obvious pride, frequently telling Jane that she had given him the world. The ranch prospered under Dalton's management. He was a fair boss, but demanded quality work from his hands. He treated the animals well, which resulted in healthy livestock that brought good prices. He expanded their holdings slowly and carefully, never overextending. Jane helped with the bookkeeping, discovering she had a head for numbers and finances. Her school continued to grow too. By 1883, they had enough students that Jane hired an assistant teacher, a young woman named Rebecca, who had just arrived from St. Louis. Jane enjoyed mentoring her, sharing teaching techniques and materials. The years passed in a blur of busy, happy activity. Matthew started school when he was 6, sitting in his mother's classroom, but treated no differently than any other student. Elizabeth followed 2 years later. They had a third child in 1885, another boy they named Daniel, and a fourth in 1887, a girl they called Sarah after Dalton's mother. The house was always full of noise and activity, children running and playing, ranch hands coming and going, neighbors stopping by. Jane sometimes felt overwhelmed by the chaos, but Dalton was always there to support her, to take over when she needed a break, to hold her at night and remind her how strong she was. They faced challenges, of course. There was a terrible drought in 1886 that killed off part of the herd. A fire in 1888 destroyed one of the barns. Elizabeth got scarlet fever in 1889, and they spent terrifying weeks nursing her back to health. But they faced every challenge together, supporting each other, never giving up. On their 10th anniversary, Dalton took Jane on a ride out to the canyon where he had found her all those years ago. They left the children with Michael and Sarah, who now had 3 children of their own. They stood together at the spot where Jane had waited, frightened and alone, so long ago. The landscape looked the same, unchanged by time. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come back?" Dalton asked. "I try not to," Jane admitted. "It is too terrible to imagine. But I also think about how we might never have found each other if things had been different. If I had not been forgotten, we would have reached Fort Sumner with the drive, and you would have moved on to the next job. We might never have talked. I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Dalton said, "that we were meant to be together, and fate would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe," Jane said, "but I'm glad it happened the way it did. You came back for me when nobody else would. You showed me I mattered before I even knew I needed to hear it. Everything good in my life now, our children, our home, our future, it all started with you riding back into that canyon. You matter most," Dalton said, echoing his words from that first day. "That is still true, Jane. You always will. You and our children, the life we built together, that is everything to me." "You gave me a life I did not know I could have," Jane said. "You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You chose me when I had nothing to offer. You made me feel valued and loved and important. You were always valuable, always important. I just made sure you knew it." Dalton pulled her close. "I love you, Jane Kincaid, more now than the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." They kissed there in the desert, the same desert that had almost claimed Jane's life, but instead had given her everything worth living for. The years continued to be good to them. The ranch grew into one of the most successful in the region. Jane's school became permanent and well-respected, with students coming from miles around. Their children grew healthy and strong, each with their own personality and dreams. Matthew inherited his father's love of ranching and started learning the business young. Elizabeth was artistic, always drawing or painting, seeing beauty in everything. Daniel had his mother's scholarly mind and loved books and learning above all else. Sarah was adventurous and fearless, always climbing trees or riding horses too fast. By 1895, Jane and Dalton had been married 16 years. Matthew was 15, already working the ranch alongside his father. Elizabeth was 13, helping teach the younger students at school. Daniel was 10, his nose always in a book. Sarah was 8, getting into everything. They added 2 more children in those years, twin boys in 1890 that they named Thomas, after Tom Crawford, and Michael, after Jane's brother. The twins were 5 now, mirror images of each other with dark hair and mischievous smiles. The house was fuller and louder than ever. Jane sometimes looked around at the chaos, the muddy boots by the door, the children's drawings on the walls, the constant noise and activity, and felt almost overwhelmed by her own happiness. One evening in late summer, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Jane and Dalton sat on the front porch watching the stars. It was their favorite time of day, these quiet moments together. "Do you remember what you said the first night in the desert?" Jane asked. "When I asked why you came back?" "I said you mattered," Dalton replied. "Because you did. You do." "You changed my whole life with that choice," Jane said. "If you had not come back, I would have died there. Instead, I got all of this. A husband I love, children who bring me joy every day, a home, a purpose, a future, all because you decided I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Jane, worth everything I gave up and more. That cattle drive job, those wages, they meant nothing compared to the life I found with you." Dalton took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles, in a gesture that had become habit over the years. "Sometimes I think about the man I was before I met you. Lonely, drifting, no real ties to anything. And then I think about the man I am now. A husband, a father, a rancher, a member of this community. You made me better, Jane. You gave me something to work for, someone to be worthy of." "We made each other better," Jane corrected. "We built this life together." "Together," Dalton agreed. "Always together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel across the sky. Somewhere in the house, one of the twins cried out in his sleep, and they heard Elizabeth's voice soothing him. Jane smiled. Their oldest daughter was going to make a wonderful teacher someday, or a wonderful mother, or both. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how grateful. Most people do not get this, Dalton. They do not get a love that lasts, that grows stronger instead of fading. They do not get a partner who truly sees them and chooses them every day. I have that with you." "I have it with you too," Dalton said. "Every morning, I wake up and think about how I get to spend another day with you. Every night I go to sleep grateful that you are beside me. That has not changed in 16 years, Jane. It never will." As the years went on, their children grew and started making their own paths. Matthew married at 21, a rancher's daughter named Anna, who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the far edge of the property and started their own family, giving Jane and Dalton their first grandchild, a boy they named Dalton James, in 1898. Elizabeth went to Denver to study art when she was 18, something that terrified Jane, but that she supported because she knew her daughter's talent deserved nurturing. Elizabeth came home 2 years later with new skills and ideas, opening a small studio in Fort Sumner where she taught art and sold her paintings. Daniel earned a scholarship to a teacher's college, determined to follow in his mother's footsteps. He returned to Fort Sumner after graduation and took over the school from Jane, who was ready to reduce her teaching load and spend more time with her growing number of grandchildren. Sarah shocked everyone by becoming a veterinarian's apprentice, one of the few women in such a role. She had always loved animals, and her fearlessness served her well in the demanding work. The twins, Thomas and Michael, went into ranching with their father and older brother, the 3 of them forming a strong team. By 1905, Jane and Dalton had been married 26 years. They had 6 children, 4 grandchildren, and a legacy that extended throughout the community. The ranch was thriving, the school Daniel ran was excellent, and their family was close despite everyone's busy lives. Jane was 49 years old, her blonde hair now streaked with silver. She had lines around her eyes from years of smiling and squinting in the bright sun. Her hands were weathered from work, her body softer and rounder than it had been in her youth. But Dalton still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Dalton was 53, his dark hair more gray than black now. His face was deeply lined, his hands scarred from years of ranch work. His shoulders were still strong, though he moved more slowly than he once had. But his eyes were the same, that creek watercolor that Jane had fallen in love with. They celebrated their anniversary quietly that year, just the 2 of them. Their children had offered to throw a big party, but Jane and Dalton preferred to spend the day alone together. They rode out to their canyon, something they did every anniversary. 26 years, Jane said, standing in the same spot where Dalton had found her. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Dalton agreed. I remember every detail of that day. How scared you looked, how brave you were trying to be, how my heart just knew, even then, that you were the one. I was certain I was going to die, Jane admitted. I had given up hope, and then you came riding back and everything changed. You saved my life, Dalton, not just by bringing me to Fort Sumner, but by showing me what love could be, what partnership looked like, what it meant to be truly seen and valued. You saved mine too, Dalton said. I was just going through the motions before you, moving from job to job, sending money home, but never really living. You gave me a reason to live, Jane, a purpose, a future I actually cared about building. They stood together, his arms around her, watching the desert landscape that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The land was unchanged, eternal, and enduring. But they had changed. They had grown, evolved, built a life together that exceeded anything either of them had imagined that day. Do you have any regrets? Jane asked. Not a single one, Dalton said firmly. Every choice I made led me to you, and that makes every hardship worth it. What about you? No regrets, Jane said. Maybe I wish I could have met you sooner, had more years together, but I am grateful for every moment we have had, and I am grateful we still have time ahead of us. We are not done yet, Dalton. No, he agreed. We are not done. We have grandchildren to spoil, children to support, a ranch to run, and each other to love. I am looking forward to growing old with you, Jane, to watching the sunset years together. They did grow old together. The years brought inevitable changes and challenges. Jane's brother Michael died in 1908, a loss that hit her hard. Sarah developed a heart condition in 1910 that required her to slow down and eventually retire from her veterinary work. One of the twins, Thomas, was injured in a ranching accident in 1912, breaking his leg badly enough that he walked with a limp ever after. But there were triumphs too. Elizabeth's art was exhibited in galleries in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Daniel was appointed county superintendent of schools, overseeing education throughout the region. Matthew and Anna had 5 children who kept the main house full of noise and laughter. The ranch continued to prosper, adapting to new times and methods. Jane and Dalton moved into a smaller house on the property in 1915, turning the main house over to Matthew and his family. They downsized happily, needing less space now that it was just the two of them. Their little house had a big porch where they spent evenings, watching the land they had built their life on. In 1919, they celebrated their 40th anniversary. All 6 of their children came home for it, bringing spouses and children, and even a few grandchildren's children. The party was huge, half the county attending. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, stories told, and memories shared. Jane stood with Dalton in the middle of it all, surrounded by the family they had created, the community they had helped build, and she felt a sense of completion. This was what mattered, not the ranch or the money or the property, but this, love multiplied across generations, a legacy of kindness and hard work and values that would continue long after she and Dalton were gone. We did good, she whispered to Dalton as they watched their grandchildren play. We did better than good, Dalton replied. We did extraordinary. Look at all of this, Jane, all of these people, all of this love and happiness. We built this, you and me, together. As they grew older still, they stayed active as long as they could. Jane taught music classes well into her 60s. Dalton still rode the ranch every day, though he let his sons handle more of the heavy work. They maintained their traditions, morning coffee together, evening walks, Sunday dinners with whatever family members were available, annual trips to their canyon. They were in their 70s when Dalton's health began to fail. It started small, just getting tired more easily, needing more rest. But it progressed steadily. A heart condition, the doctor said, was just age catching up. Dalton hated slowing down, hated feeling weak, but he accepted it with the same grace he had brought to everything else in life. Jane cared for him tenderly, the way he had cared for her through all their years together. She helped him when he needed it, gave him space when he wanted it, sat with him, and held his hand when words were not necessary. I am sorry, he said one day. I am sorry I am leaving you. You have nothing to apologize for, Jane said firmly. You gave me 47 years, Dalton. 47 incredible years. That is more than most people ever get. I am grateful for every single moment. I wish we had more time, Dalton said. I wish I could stay with you longer. So do I. But we have had a beautiful life, my love. We built something meaningful together. When you leave, you will leave behind children who love you, grandchildren who adore you, great-grandchildren who carry your name. You will leave behind a thriving ranch, a strong community, and a woman who loved you more than life itself. That is a legacy to be proud of. Dalton died peacefully in the spring of 1926, with Jane holding his hand and all 6 of their children gathered around. His last words were, "I love you, Jane. You mattered most. You always did." The funeral was huge, attended by everyone whose lives Dalton had touched over the years. The stories shared painted a picture of a man who was kind, fair, hard-working, and devoted to his family. But Jane knew the full truth of him. She knew the man who had ridden back into a canyon to save a woman he barely knew. The man who had given up everything because it was the right thing to do. The man who had built a life of meaning and purpose with her. She missed him desperately. After 47 years of marriage, his absence was a physical ache. But she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, making sure she was cared for and included in everything. Her grandchildren visited constantly, bringing energy and life into her quiet house. Her great-grandchildren climbed into her lap to hear stories about their great-grandfather and the early days of the ranch. Jane lived another 8 years after Dalton died. She spent that time surrounded by family, watching new generations grow, telling stories about the past, and writing everything down so nothing would be forgotten. She wrote about that day in the canyon, about Dalton riding back, about their courtship and marriage and the life they built together. She gave copies of her writings to each of her children, making them promise to pass the stories down. "This matters," she told them. "Your father and I, what we built together, the choices we made, the love we shared, it matters. It is your heritage and your legacy. Remember it, honor it, teach it to your children." Jane died peacefully in her sleep in July 1934, just after her 78th birthday. She was buried next to Dalton in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. The headstone read, "Jane Thompson Kincaid, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher. She mattered most." At the funeral, Matthew read from his mother's writings, telling the story of how his parents met. He described the cattle drive, the forgotten woman, the cowboy who rode back, and the incredible love story that followed. There was not a dry eye in attendance. The ranch continued under Matthew's management, then passed to his children and grandchildren. The school Daniel had run became a model for rural education throughout the state. Elizabeth's art hung in museums. Sarah's pioneering work in veterinary medicine inspired other women to enter the field. The twins' dedication to sustainable ranching practices influenced agricultural methods throughout the region. But more than any of those achievements, Dalton and Jane's legacy lived on in the values they had instilled in their family. The belief that every person matters, that love is worth sacrificing for, that partnership means supporting each other through everything. The understanding that building something meaningful takes time and effort, but the results are worth it. Generations later, their descendants still told the story of Jane Thompson, forgotten when the group moved camp, the story of Dalton Kincaid, the cowboy who rode back and said she mattered most, the story of how one choice, one act of courage and compassion, created ripples that spread across decades and touched countless lives. It was a love story, a story about being seen and valued, about choosing someone when you have nothing to gain except the person themselves, about building a life together through hard work, dedication, and unwavering commitment, about love that does not just last, but grows deeper with every passing year. It was the story of two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who chose each other every day for nearly 5 decades, and who left behind a legacy of love that would never be forgotten. Because in the end, that is what mattered most. Not wealth or fame or property, but love. The kind of love that saves lives, builds futures, and echoes across generations. The kind of love that starts with one person saying to another, "You matter most," and then spending a lifetime proving it true.